Hey everybody, so here is your mini lecture as promised. Today I'm going to address a few things that y'all brought up. So as I said, gendered God language, the terms involuntary and elective identity in poly, as well as a note about feminism, the term feminism, and the baggage that it carries, not only in Islam, as we found in the Al-Wazni reading, but sort of across religious traditions. So with the God language, this is something that we've clearly read about in our chapter on Judaism, as well as our chapter on Christianity in our textbook. And gendered God language, especially in the Abrahamic traditions, which are going to be Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they're called the Abrahamic traditions because they all share Abraham as a prophet, are going to be these monotheistic religions, meaning one God, where God is most typically understood in these male terms. And so feminists in all three traditions, most notably Judaism and Christianity, are going to challenge this traditional male God language, and they do this in a number of ways. So one way that some feminists will challenge male God language is to say that there are examples in the religious text, whether that's going to be the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Bible, or the Quran, of Jesus, of God being understood in feminine terms. So one of those that's pointed out to us in our chapter on Christianity is the term Sophia, which means wisdom and is an aspect of God that is understood to be a feminine one. Sophia obviously being something that we think of as a feminine name. And so some Christian feminists will look to these texts and say, okay, well, within the sacred text itself, we have these examples of God being referred to in feminine terms. And that means that we just need to highlight these portions of the text, that there's something that has been sort of pushed down as the dominant reference to God in the texts. Another way that Christian feminists will try to deal with what they see as a problem of this exclusively or predominantly male God language is to say, well, let's use gender neutral terms to refer to God, because theologically speaking, in all three traditions, the ways that we understand God with our human minds are going to be limited anyway. God will not be understood as having a gender, and in that case, any word that we use to refer to God, gendered or not, is just going to be a way for our human minds to understand God. So if we do away with that gendered reference, right, we can understand God in terms that are not going to be he or she, masculine or feminine, but gender neutral. This becomes a touch of a problem in the case of Christianity, where you add in Jesus as Savior. Jesus, right, is going to be pretty much presented as male, right? Son of God, has a pretty masculine ring to it. And so for Christian feminists, some say that you can do away with this heavy gendering by thinking about Jesus's ministry, which did include women and sort of at an equal to men in many ways if we read the Gospels. One approach to this, something that stood out, it seems, to a lot of people in your discussion boards, is this idea of thinking of Jesus as either not having gender or as having been transgender. And that take is not to say that Jesus was literally transgender, but to think about Jesus in terms that allow for more than just that masculine interpretation of Jesus, right? For there to be more gendered options available. So it's about broadening the thinking about our understanding of, right, what gender God is, and in this case, God through the manifestation of Jesus. So I hope that makes a little more sense of God language for you. There were a lot of questions, understandably, because these terms are not defined directly in the text. about involuntary and voluntary identity in poly. They're pretty much just what they sound like. Involuntary identity are going to be aspects of our identity that we don't have much control over. So involuntary identity are going to be things like our gender identity, our race, even though our age changes throughout time, right? I am 34. There's not much I can do to say otherwise, unless I'm not telling the truth, right? My age is an involuntary piece of my identity. And we have voluntary aspects of our identity. These are going to often be things with which we align ourselves, values that we hold and that we make a part of our identity. So for many of our participants, right, a feminist identity is going to be something that's part of their voluntary identity. Now for poly, these things can sort of overlap in many ways. She says that oftentimes our religious identity, at least when we're young, is often involuntary. If we are raised within a particular religion, if our family is particularly devout, that's often something that for us when we're children is an involuntary identity. And it remains a part of our identity even if we change our religion later in life, Polly says, because it's something that really has informed our worldview, how we understand the world, what we think about religion in general, whether we have a positive or negative outlook towards it. And so she's going to understand that childhood religious identity as involuntary. But obviously, as we get older, we have the choice about whether or not we want to continue with the religion in which we were raised, embrace another religion, not be religious at all. And in that way, religious identity can also be a voluntary identity. So there are the ways that these kinds of things can straddle both sides. For talking about feminism, the baggage it kind of carries, especially in relation to of the religions that we've studied so far with Islam. Feminism as a term in general carries a lot of baggage. It's often, as we've seen from our Resnick Dufour reading and our Poly reading, something that's seen as incompatible or incongruent with religious identity. And because of this, there is often a resistance to embrace the term, even amongst religious women who may consider, who may embrace feminist ideals, maybe don't necessarily want to adopt the term. Now, that's not the case with our interviewees in Resnick Dufour or Poly. We do see this come across in the Al-Wazni reading because, in particular, there has been a bit of tension between sort of the dominant feminist community for a long time, and in particular, white Western feminism, and with Muslim women who wear the hijab. And this is because white Western feminism for a long time, this still happens to a degree, is going to have said, right, okay, well, you have to cover up, so you must be oppressed. Someone must be making you do this because my values say that I should be free, right, to be uncovered and sort of out in the world. And therefore, those feminist values must also apply to everyone across cultures, across religions. And it's this paternalistic and sort of dismissive approach that says, right, I know what's best for you. And because of that, understandably, there's a bit of tension surrounding accepting a feminist identity for some Muslim women who may identify with many values that would align with feminism, because of that feeling of having been looked down upon, sort of, oh, they think they know what's better for me than myself. Like, you know, what's that about? And so there has been a tension there. So that's why you'll see in Al-Wazni some valid, I think, criticisms of feminism, white Western feminism in particular. And so that's where that tension really comes from. So these are the 3 topics that y'all really kind of asked for from our most recent readings. If there is anything else you would like me to cover, as always, let me know, and I am happy to do so. Happy Tuesday, and I'll see you all soon.